Welcome to another episode of the Harder to Breathe podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Dusick. I was the founding drummer of Maroon 5, but I'm now a registered therapist, author, and mental health advocate. With me, as always, is my co-host, Duck Maillard. How you doing, Duck?
I don't know what to do with myself. I have all this free time that I've never had. My son is on a school-sponsored 3-day overnight field trip. And
wow.
For literally the first time in 11 years, my wife and I have an empty nest, and we don't know what to do with ourselves. We're buying IKEA furniture and building it. We're like watching all the shows we haven't been able to catch up on. It's a very boring life, but it's very exciting for lame parents like us.
Well, you guys are taking me out to dinner tonight.
And we're going out to dinner tonight. That's something we haven't ever been able to do because we're too cheap to get a babysitter. So that's true. Yeah, we're going out to dinner.
Well, we're at that age where we have to plan these things like a month in advance, right? It's like,
and then 2 days out we cancel.
Right, something came up. Yeah. I've never been really good at last minute plans. To be honest, I'm not one of those fly by the seat of my pants, just go with the flow type of people. But yeah,
that's true. We invite you out kind of more often than and you are always like, I can't. I work today. Maybe tomorrow, and then we're like a month ago, we're going to take you out to dinner on Thursday,
I suppose that's something I can work on at this point in my life. That's probably is an aspect.
Why do you think that is?
Well, the tables have turned, Mr. Therapist.
How the turntables have turned.
Right. I think it is probably a control thing. For me, if I'm being honest, I've always been someone that likes to have things kind of mapped out and planned because that feels safe to me, Yeah. And so when things come up in the last 24 hours or whatever, immediately it's like causes me anxiety. I'm like, and I don't know why I have to like mentally prepare myself for something like that. That's
My
just
wife is like that too.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the unscheduled pop-in? Like if your doorbell rings and suddenly you're like, your friends are there and they're like, hey, we were in the neighborhood. Would that just completely stress you out?
Yeah. At this point in my life, I don't know. There was a time in my life when that definitely would stress me out, but granted, it was because I was a mess. Right. And so in whatever condition I might be in that, at that moment, it might have affected, the level of anxiety that would have somebody popping in. And that's maybe part of it too, if I'm thinking about it now. It's the residual effect of that. I went through a stage, because early in my life, I always was a control freak and I always liked to have things planned out. But I lived in an apartment in college, 6 people in a 3-bedroom apartment. That door was certainly never locked, sometimes never closed.
So no one told you life was gonna be the time. Sorry.
Yes, it was very much like that. I think that's the reason why I was okay signing up for that living environment, because I loved Friends when I was 17, 18 years old.
You're such a Ross.
I am such a Ross.
You are even the hair.
A little Monica in there too, though.
Yeah.
Personality-wise, I'm definitely a Monica.
Yeah.
No, but I'm Ross. People used to tell me that, actually. When the show first came out, they're like, you look, and you're kind of like Ross.
Not in a bad way. I think Ross was a sleeper funniest guy. Everyone loves Chandler, but...
I'm a huge Ross fan. I'm a big David Schwimmer fan, to be honest. Yeah. I think what's underrated is his physical comedy.
Agreed.
I feel like, John Ritter on Three's Company is probably the greatest physical comedy in my lifetime, at least, on a sitcom. Just the pratfalls and stuff, he took it to another level. But Schwimmer was pretty, in an understated way, really, with his... Anyway, where are we going with this?
I know. Well, I was going to say, I was about to jump in and be like, I know this is going all over the place, but specifically Three's Company, you want to talk about like the origins of anxiety? Three's Company made me so uncomfortable as a kid because... bedroom farce where Jack is in the kitchen stuffing a turkey and being like, "Oh, you like that? Yeah, I'm gonna get in there real deep." And Mr. Furley's like through the door, be like, "What's he talking about? He's got a woman in there," And I was like, it's just a misunderstanding. If Jack would just say, "I've got a turkey in here, Mr. Furley," it would all be cleared up. But it would be 30 minutes of like stress and tension. It literally did. It always made me like very uncomfortable, and that carries over to today to like. it's more like prank shows like Borat and stuff where I don't mind, or Jackass, like I don't mind the pranks where they themselves get hurt or embarrassed. But when there's someone who didn't sign up for it, who has to like when they go into a store and there's a poor clerk whose only job is like they're making $8 an hour and they like, destroy the store. I feel it makes me cringe so hardcore for those other people. So there's something there. Maybe we should delve into that. Brian's television inspired anxiety.
Well, that's kind of like the classic setup for most romantic comedies. It's like if they just had a conversation, they could clear all of this up very quickly, but then you wouldn't have a movie. So you have to.
but Brian would be much more comfortable. So let's think about the children, can't we?
Right. So what the heck were we talking about?
Who knows? Oh, about if I were to pop over your house unannounced, how you would feel.
Right. Okay. So I was in college.
Right. And we were watching Friends.
Yes. It was like Friends. That was the inspiration for my life with them. It was very much, early 20s. And I did sign up for the idea that my life was going to be sort of in upheaval a lot, that people would just pop in. And we did. I mean, I had friends that were just kind of, you'd wake up and you'd see someone sleeping on your couch and you're just like, oh, they showed up sometime late last night and slept on our couch. Great. And people would come and go. Our neighbors and just people in the neighborhood would come in and stop in and say hi. And there was always somebody hanging out in the living room. And I loved it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I signed up for. I was able to get myself mentally in a space that was fun. So I'm obviously capable of being comfortable with that.
But we're all like that in our 20s. I mean, it's like who we become now is a little bit more who our final form,
Well, I don't know if I was that way now. It was a very concerted effort to go with the flow. And then I remember when I went on the road with the band, because the first time we went on the road was back in 97 when I was like 19 years old. I wasn't mentally prepared for that. And it was a little miserable, to be honest. Yeah. I was homesick. We were very much up in each other's faces all the time. And that was not comfortable for me. I remember being pretty grumpy a lot of the time. But then when I went back to school and I moved into that apartment around 99, I think, I made a very specific change of mindset to be like, you gotta loosen the reins a little bit, Ryan. You gotta go with the flow and just be open to whatever this situation brings. And I wanted to bring that on the road with me because I wanted to not be so grumpy, but just have a better experience for myself, enjoy it, and be able to take in the moments that arose. And it did. It worked for a while.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that in my darker days when I was dealing with anxiety, depression, and alcoholism, the pop-in would have been a moment of terror.
Yeah. It's funny.
Now,
it's carried over for me in terms of as a parent now. My dream, it sounds like your house was the house. I mean, obviously the band rehearsed at your house and things like that. But my dream has always been to be the house where like my son and all of his friends hang out. I wish we had a pool and like, it's just open door policy. We have a fridge out in the garage filled with sodas and they can just go out. You know what I mean? I mean, sorry, healthy drinks, parents. It's much more evolved. But you know what I mean? Like, I think that the natural progression from the open door friends apartment into the cool house. Oh, we love Mr. Maillard. He's awesome. He lets us drink soda out of the garage. I wanted that. And I get the sense that my wife does not want that and will never want that. So even if I get big, rich, and famous and have a nice big pool, it's only going to be scheduled swim appointments with friends and things like that. But
well, is that your own need to be the cool dad? Is that where that's coming from?
I'm sure it is. It's probably also my own need to be the cool kid, because I had a pool growing up and I did not have a ton of pool parties with lots of people. I had a core group of 2 or 3 friends, but just that image of somebody walking in and being like, "Hey, Mr. M," and be like, "Oh, Billy, don't you have a home? All right, you staying for dinner?" That's that vibe of Southern California, open air, everybody's just sitting down. I love that ideal in my mind. Probably would be annoying if Billy just kept coming over and eating our food, but I'd like to be in a place where it wouldn't matter. I'd be so rich and have so much food and my private chef has prepared it that it wouldn't matter. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. But yes, I'm sure there's a desire to be the cool dad and a desire to sort of re-litigate my own childhood in a way that, like, I want my son to have that feeling as opposed to the feeling that I had. But as one of our past guests said, you don't have to worry about, fixing your childhood wrongs for your kid because they're having a different experience. So maybe I don't have to worry about that. I've learned. See, we're learning.
Well, that's an interesting take on the psychology of the cool mom or the cool dad.
Yeah.
It's essentially fulfilling something that you didn't get as a child, wanting so badly to be the cool kid.
I certainly don't want to be the parent who's like in high school, like, you guys can drink here because I know you're drinking here. Like, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to do that. So
you keep me young.
Yeah. So
no,
anyway.
I hear you. And, I don't know. For me, obviously, I've chosen not to have kids. And for me, I think that there's still the same impulses, though, as an adult. I think we all, to some extent, can't help but play out some of the things that were
want to be cool,
the grievances of our youth. I was not popular in high school. Not that I need to be popular now, but certainly that left a scar.
That's funny to me. Like, I understand that you were a bit in your head in high school, and worrying, but I struggle to believe that you weren't at least viewed, like, maybe you weren't popular in terms of, like, because you weren't a big boisterous personality like Adam was, but you seem like one of those guys that could fit. I mean, you're a great athlete, you're intellectual, you're a musician, you're handsome, you know what I mean? Like, I would figure that you'd be one of those guys that can kind of float, like, oh yeah, we know that Ryan, dude, he's cool. Oh yeah, we play music with that guy. Oh yeah, we play baseball with that guy. Is that your perception of it, or were you really not popular in high school? Did people, like, actively dislike you?
Well, you didn't go to my high school.
That's true.
Well, I think you're probably right to a certain extent that a lot of this is probably my own insecurities, and it was my perception more than as much as it was reality. However, it was a unique setting in that a lot of the people at that school were a lot wealthier than me, came from a very different background, and it wasn't a place where, I grew up watching movies where it was like the star of the football team was the most popular guy, and that wasn't the case at all. No one cared about that. It was, and then the guy in the band, that would be cool in probably 90% of high schools. Right. It was in my perception. It was in my perception, and I could be wrong. I could be projecting my own grievances onto it, but it was more about status. Who your parents were, how much money you had, what kind of car you drove, essentially what kind of life you were headed towards.
Gotcha.
What kind of trust fund you had, what kind of college you were going to go to. And so it wasn't, I think because I was a grunge kid, and part of that was my rebelliousness, rejecting it. And I was like, well, I'm going to be alternative. My dad used to refer to it as nonconformist conformity. Because
there were so many of you non-conforming at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, it's like we were alternative kids. It's like, but we were all wearing the same thing, and it was mainstream at a certain point. All the flannel and all, and that pissed me off. And it was like the Gap was like, buy your grunge clothes here at the Gap. But no, that wasn't the case at my school, though. In my school, it was a lot of the kids had designer jeans and sweaters, and I was wearing
very Beverly Hills 90210 coded.
Yeah. That was definitely the vibe. But I think for me, I mean, I was shy, and so that was a big part of it, I think. And so that was part of my insecurity. But I was given a great disadvantage because, like, a quarter of my class coming in all went to elementary school together.
Right.
And they'd known each other since they were little kids, and they had this very tight clique that I didn't belong to and didn't fit into. And so from day one, I felt like an outsider. It's funny to fast forward to how this applies to our conversation. I missed my 10-year reunion because I was on the road, and I thought, oh man, how cool would that be? It was right in the middle of, I graduated in 95, so it was 2005. It would have been right in the middle of Songs About Jane being the biggest album in the world. And I was so bummed because I wanted to have that John Mayer bust down the doors of your high school,
run through the halls, scream at the top of your lungs. Yeah.
Yeah. And just like, that's how much of I was still carrying it around, it was like, and a lot of people have that feeling. It's like, I'm going to show them, who's cool now. And so I didn't get to go. And then, so I was excited to go to my 20-year reunion, and I did go, and I was in a much different place at that point in my life, but I was somehow in the midst of my alcoholism and where I was at, still thinking like, well, I was in Maroon 5 and they're going to be impressed and everyone's going to want to talk to me. And it occurred to me very quickly, like, first off, they don't give a shit, because Maroon 5 money is nothing compared to hedge fund money.
Wow.
But being famous is nothing compared to having, a yacht
Island.
and an island. Yeah, no, honestly, like, it was like, it's entertainment,
Yeah.
That, again, this is my perception. I could be projecting all of this onto them. But what I realized what was more important is that I didn't care. It was like, oh my God, I was carrying with me this teenage insecurity and placing all this importance on these people that I haven't spoken to in 20 years, accepting me.
Yeah.
And I realized, like, that doesn't mean anything to me now. Like, this was just a part of me that hadn't matured because it was stuck in that place, in that wound. And once I was confronted with the reality of the situation, I was like, oh my God, I can let go of this so easily. Like, this has no relevance to my life today, and probably even less so now. I have a feeling if I go to my 30-year reunion, which is coming up, how scary is that?
I know.
I have a feeling that I would probably want to just connect with a lot of the people that I probably, didn't realize were friends and were people that accepted me, because I was so consumed with the popular rich kids accepting me that I was just blind to what was right in front of me. And I would enjoy that more. And I wouldn't be consumed or care at all about the other half of the kids that I spent 2 decades of my life going, God, I wish they had accepted me.
I feel like we've had a breakthrough today. I feel like we've done some good work. Our time is up, but thank you for sharing.
I'm glad that came full circle and turned into a positive thing.
Speaking of which, by the way, my 20-year reunion, I don't mean to burst your bubble, but it was exactly what you had hoped it would be for me. Like, I didn't go to a rich kid high school. I just went to, and so it was like, Brian, the guy from all the commercials. And I was like, oh, me? Come on, shucks. Like, it really was like, I mean, I have to admit, I went with my best friend and our wives. Like, they didn't go with us. They were like, screw that. We don't want to see all your lame New Jersey high school friends. They went out and had dinner together. They had a great night. But it was a lot of fun for us, because it was like I connected with a lot of old friends, but a lot of people that was like, dude, I hated you in high school, but now I see you on TV and you're awesome. And I'm like, oh, that's all I ever wanted to hear. So thanks. Shout out to all the people who were really nice to me at my 20th. Hopefully you're nice to me at my 30th.
Trash Santa came full circle.
Oh, way to go. Deep cut on Brian's trauma.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway. It's time to segue. I don't know how to segue from that to this.
We'll have to ask our guest if he was popular in high school.
Yeah, let's make that a theme.
Okay.
Okay, we'll go there. So our guest on today's episode is a guy named Brant Menswar. And for some reason, every time I see his name or think his name, I want to say Brant Menswar.
Oh, I want to say, Brent, you're going to like the way you look, menswear house.
Oh, okay.
That's me. I'm sure he's heard that before.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we'll ask him that too.
First question. Menswear house?
No, but it's Brant Menswar. Okay. So, okay. We got that straight. Hopefully I won't mispronounce that when I introduce him. He is a very accomplished speaker and coach. He's in this world of a few guests we've had, of people that work with, highly motivated people in the corporate world. He's an executive coach. He speaks, at conferences to large audiences of people that are in the industry of big business. And so, but it's interesting because he has a background. We have a lot of similarities, which I don't want to give away because I want to talk to him about it. But there's music, there's sports, there's things we have in common. And he's got this concept, momentum, and he's made a podcast out of it. He has a book coming out about it that has to do with the idea that one moment in your life can be a shift. There can be a moment in which everything changes for you and your mindset changes and everything in terms of how you navigate your future changes. Now, that's something I've heard in other conceptualizations before, but I'm curious to hear his take on it because you hear like, I don't know, there are other coaches like in the Tony Robbins world that have that sort of, that idea that, you don't have to go through 8 years of therapy to change and fix yourself. It can happen in an instant, right?
And so we timed that snap perfectly.
I've always been a little bit skeptical of that, but Brant, from what I've seen, has a really inspiring sort of positive, motivational way of talking about this. So I want to hear his take on it. Anything else you want to say?
I would say let's hold his feet to the fire. Let's make him put up or shut up. Maybe can motivate me to get to the next level. So we'll see.
All right. So without any further ado, here's our conversation with Brant Menswar right here on the Harder to Breathe podcast. Brant Menswar, welcome to the Harder to Breathe podcast.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate both you and Duck. Great being here.
Yeah, this is cool. Glad to meet you. Finally, we've only talked on email so far, so I'm seeing your face for the first time here, and this is cool. It turns out, as I've been doing a little bit of research on you, that you and I have quite a few things in common. I don't know if you're aware, but first and foremost, we both wanted to be baseball players growing up.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Sounds like you actually made a go of it. You were on your way.
I was sort of come from a baseball family. That was the plan. Ended up getting hurt and had to pivot without any plan to be, I didn't grow up wanting to be the architect or the doctor. I just grew up wanting to pitch. So I didn't really know what else to do at that point. But yeah, it sort of weirdly landed me in the music business for a couple of decades, which is just strange. Yeah.
Which is item number 2, which is a shared common background. And were you always a musician, or was it something you picked up?
No. And let's be clear, I was just slightly less successful than you on the music side of things. Let's be clear about that. Music turned for me, I was already a fossil in the music world before I even started. I was 30 before I just went out and started playing. For me, it started as sort of a calling, like a music ministry sort of a thing, and decided I was going to quit my job and go out on the road. And so sort of set this goal for myself, took the last 6 months before I had set that date to quit my job and started booking gigs at coffee houses and churches and wherever else I could possibly play. And by the time I got to that 6-month mark of gonna quit my job that day, I had 75 or so gigs booked all over the country. That's how it started. And then eventually, sort of got a couple other guys together to form a band and somehow through hell and high water made it about 20 years just touring and nobody knowing who we are. So there you go.
That's amazing. 20 years sounds like a long time on the road. I only spent about 5 years of my life on the road, and that felt like a lifetime. And that was pretty cushy too. I mean, we had obviously at a certain point some success, and I don't know, are you like in a van? Are you in a bus? What does that look like?
Yeah, I don't know that Prevost makes a Kia Soul, but if they did, it would be stretched.
That's some inside baseball stuff right there. For those of you who weren't world famous touring musicians.
So no, we did a few. We did the car thing, the van thing, a bus thing for a few tours, and a little bit of everything in between. But for the majority, I mean, we were a working man's band, so wherever we could possibly jump in, and the band grew and shrunk based on budgets of who was hiring us to play. So sometimes we were a 3-piece, sometimes we were a mariachi band, depending on what the budget was that they had. But for the most part, we were touring hard and doing the driving ourselves and all that fun stuff.
Well, it's amazing that you made the dream work. I remember because Duck actually was in a band that I was working with, producing and managing, and you guys were pretty close to 30 around that time, right?
We were over 30. Yeah.
Were you over 30?
Yeah, we were already Like we didn't want to get in a van, you know. I was like, I got a kid on the way. Like, I'm not, you know what I mean? So
Yes.
yeah, I think there's something to be said for being 22 and being like, yeah, I'll sleep on my buddy's lap. Who cares? Like, you're a lot more willing to do the grunt work than you are when you're older and your back hurts.
Truth.
I remember that being an issue though, because I was like, you guys, it's unlikely at 30 that you're going to break through and have any kind of real success. But if you're going to, it's going to be because you're willing to be road dogs.
Yeah.
You know, and so obviously, Brant, it sounds like you were willing to do that and are still willing to do that. Are you still going out?
Not as much. I sort of transitioned from one stage to another and into the keynote speaking world. Started about 9-10 years ago and full time since probably 2019. Our last record came out in 2018. So that was called I Thought You'd Be Bigger. You're welcome. And we had an opportunity to record with a bunch of the guys in Bob Dylan's band. And so we decided that we couldn't pass that up. So we recorded that in 2018. But from pretty much 2019 on, I make my living as a keynote speaker.
How did that, I mean, I know we're certainly going to get into it, but how did that progression happen, you know, from touring musician to, hey, I can actually speak about this stuff and people seem to resonate, you know, connect with what I'm saying? How did that transition happen?
Well, it was sort of forced. My oldest son, Theo, at the time was 14 and was diagnosed with a really rare blood cancer and needed to have a bone marrow transplant. And so that was obviously forcing me off the road and not being able to tour for weeks and weeks or months at a time. So we sort of started to restructure what we were doing. I knew that I was going to have to pivot because he was going to require some serious care when this was done. And, you know, we spent 263 days in the hospital and, it was a battle for sure. He, an absolute warrior. He battled for 9 years until we ended up eventually losing him to a combination of cancer and COVID when it hit in 2021. So it was, that was sort of the initial pivot was I needed to get off the road and be home as much as I could. And at the time I had a buddy who was sort of in a similar situation in that he was, had been on the road with his band for years and years, and he was ready to move on to the next thing. And so he started a company called Banding People Together, and they would, it started as a team building organization, and they'd go into companies and break them into bands and teach them collaboration through writing music. And so each band would come up with a band name and write a song, and we'd take those songs back to the studio in Atlanta and record them, just like they'd hear on the radio, and send them back to the organizations as a thank you and a sort of incentive for getting their goals done. So that's sort of how it all started for me.
How has the content and the delivery of your speaking evolved? What was it when it started out, and how did it get to where it's at now? Because it sounds like you're having a lot of success and making a big impact. So what was it there from day one, or what did it look like when you started?
So, I think it's interesting when you sort of live the rock star life for a while, swagger's never the problem. so you're able to sort of come in, and it's the keynote speaking world is a niche world. And what I would say is, what I've noticed over the years is that there are two types of speakers. There are presenters who are really good at presenting information, but the information is the star, right? Mm-hmm. And then there are true speakers who leave enough space to capture the truth in the room. They're not tied to a slide. They're not tied to their narrative. They can pivot. They can engage the crowd. They can do different things that presenters find incredibly difficult. Just from the nature of what we do and pivoting and, everybody hated that song. Let's play Sweet Caroline. Whatever it was, pivoting in the music world happens in the speaker world. You sort of have things that you are going to plan on speaking about, and some of them connect and some of them don't. And if you're not willing to pivot, you got to be willing to suffer the consequences. And so that's sort of how it is. So I started by talking about collaboration a lot and using musical references for a lot of different things. But what I found after a few years is that there's a ceiling for how much an organization will pay a guy with a guitar that isn't Adam Levine, right? So it is just a fact. Unless you have broken through to household name status, it's a bit of a novelty. So I went back to school. I went to Cornell and got certified in the psychology of leadership, and figuring I needed to have a couple of things after my name that sounds like I'm not just the band guy. And what I've discovered is none of that matters. What matters is be better at what you do. And if you are amazing at what you do, people will pay you amazing amounts of money to do it. And it doesn't matter what your experience is. And that was a hard lesson to learn. Has sort of moved me to where I am today. I wrote a book about core values in 2020 that was a bestseller, and that helped a lot. And my new book comes out next year, all about building momentum. And so sort of how do we create momentum in our own lives to achieve those big goals that we've set for ourselves?
Now, I want to dive into the book and the concept of momentum in a minute. But first, you talk a lot about values, non-negotiable values as being sort of the centerpiece of where you need to find the motivation to find success in your life. So tell us a little bit about how that came about and what that means to you.
Sure. So for me, it sort of all stemmed back to my son's battle. And we were in the hospital for about a year, and about halfway through that point, he had his transplant, but he had developed something called graft versus host disease, which is sort of where the marrow that's inserted in the body doesn't recognize its environment. And so it begins to attack the body. And there are 4 different levels. If you get level 4, it's fatal. And so he had, like level 12, he had it in places that I don't even think they knew that he could get it. And so you treat that by suppressing the immune system incredibly so it can't fight back. But when you do that, you open the body up to infection. And that's exactly what happened. He ended up contracting this deadly fungus while he was in the hospital. And so he had 2 things threatening his life with opposite treatments. And so the doctors sort of threw their hands up in the air and said, no matter what we treat, the other's going to take his life. So you're going to need to go back to the room and say your goodbyes, call who you need to say. We don't think he's going to make it through the night. And, in that moment, I had no idea what my non-negotiable values were. I was in a tornado of emotion and just trying to figure out what I'm going to say to him. What am I going to tell his younger brother? Lots of everything you could possibly imagine running through your head. And I sat on the edge of the bed and I fumbled through words of trying to figure out what to say. And, when you hear your kids say, I'm going to miss you, Daddy, it's, it destroys you. It's something you don't recover from. And, through this miracle, I had called my brother who lived 1,500 miles away. And he's like, obviously he wasn't going to be able to get there in time. And so out of desperation, sort of a Hail Mary, he decided to film himself that night, holding up a bunch of poster boards explaining the scenario. My nephew's dying. This is what's happening. This is what he has. This is where they're struggling. If you have any ideas, if you know anybody that could help, please help us. We have, less than 24 hours. And he uploaded that video to YouTube. And overnight, it ended up gathering like almost 500,000 views. And by the morning, I was getting calls from doctors from all over the world who said, I saw this video and I think I can help. And so they came up with this crazy plan to save Theo's life, and it worked. And as excited as we were and as thankful that this actually, people came together in this incredible way to, the one time that social media is used for good, benefited from that. And instead of being able to celebrate, I, for years, sort of went to bed every night beating myself up, asking myself, I wonder if he thinks I gave up on him. Because, I said my goodbyes and I did, and I just, it didn't feel right. It didn't feel good when I did it. I didn't really want to do it, but I didn't know what else to do. And so after he had survived that first battle and we got him home and, we sort of worked through that, I decided that I was never going to put myself in that position again. And so I needed to figure out what these non-negotiable values actually are. What do I have that can't be moved? And I was in my mid 40s when somebody finally explained to me why black sheep are valued differently than the rest of the flock by farmers. And when they told me the truth, because we had this conversation about me feeling a little bit like a black sheep, what he said was, a black sheep's wool cannot be dyed. And so every black sheep is 100% authentically original. It cannot be made into something it wasn't meant to be. So why are you complaining about being a black sheep? And that resonated with me. That I felt like was my purpose here, to be that 100% authentic creation I was meant to be. And so as I was doing that, I realized that we have these, what I call black sheep values. What are that flock of 5 black sheep values that no matter how much someone wants to try to twist you or influence you or change you, they will not be moved. And what we've discovered over the last 4 years or so is that less than 1% of the people can actually tell you what their 5 non-negotiable values are. And we have over 500,000 data points now with our assessment that we've been working with. And it's pretty fascinating when you start looking at what people truly care about, whether it's generationally or it's male, female, or non-binary, or you name it. We industry-wise, we have some really interesting data. And for me, I had to figure that out so that if I ever found myself in that position again, I knew exactly what I needed to do. And unfortunately, I got that opportunity in February of 2021 when COVID, just his body was beat, man, from 9 years of just battling, and his lungs were in rough shape. And, you can't be on prednisone and stuff that long and not have it take a toll on the body. And so he didn't have a prayer at that point. And so I found myself standing, sitting on the edge of his bed once again. But this time, I didn't say my goodbyes. I spoke hope into him, and I was creative in how I did it. And I was myself. I was authentic, and I focused more on the impact in the moment than the potential results of what might happen. And even though I didn't get the result that I wanted, I stopped beating myself up about it because I actually did what I said I was going to do, and I felt good about that.
Wow.
While I'm so sorry for your loss, and Theo sounded like, what a warrior, like you say, to go through that for 9 years. But the whole point of what you're saying about how you took that moment and you learned from that, and you were never going to let that happen to you again. And do you in some ways view what you do as a tribute to your son? And it sounds to me like that was the inspiration for you to be like, well, if he's going to fight and he's going to not give up, that I've got to continue that message. And every day that you are a keynote speaker and you're helping other people to learn these same lessons, that must make you feel connected. I'm sorry, I'm a father as well, and I think about what that would be like, and it inspires me to to want to convey those same values and those same messages in the interactions that I have and things. Is that something that still goes through your mind each day as you do your new job and your new passion to like carry on that message for him?
Yeah, 100%. Right. And so the truth is when Theo passed, I did not take it well, and I spiraled hard, made a bunch of really bad decisions for about 18 months, just sort of put myself on an island, disconnected from everything and everyone, ended up getting divorced, like everything you can possibly imagine that happens after something like this, where it's just overwhelming. And it was a buddy of mine in my inner circle eventually came to me after about 18 months and said, listen, I know you've been through something horrendous. I'm really sorry that you had to go through that. But he said, what I want you to know is this: when you die, I believe you really die twice. And the first is when your body leaves this earth, but the second is when your name is spoken for the last time. So my question to you is, what are you doing to make sure Theo's second life outlives his first? Because this is not it. This wallowing is not going to get it done. And that was sort of the hip check into the boards that I needed to wake me up and refocus. And so I started to focus moment by moment instead of this giant plan that I wish I could accomplish and set these goals that are so far out that I couldn't even see them anymore. And so if I could focus on the moment and try to create enough momentum in that moment to carry myself forward, then I only had to worry about the next moment, and I could do that. And so that's sort of how I've approached it since.
That sounds like the transition to the platform that you've created and are launching with this book and podcast, Momentum. Tell us a little bit about that and how you're working that.
I believe the approach to the 5-year plan is extinct. You know, I'm Gen X, right? So we did things differently, and you know, my parents did things differently in their generation. But if you had a goal, you had this big goal, you had, you know, milestones that you would try to hit, and you'd have these gates that you'd want to pass through and these check-ins, and it was a really complicated process that was, you knew that it was going to take you a very long time to achieve. But in today's world of immediate gratification, and I can't wait more than the length of my TikTok video to get that bump of adrenaline that I'm looking for, it doesn't work. And it's why Gen Z only lasts 20 months in a job. And it's why we're having trouble with hybrid work. And it's why people are disconnected and all those things. And so I just started to look at what I had to do to pull out of a really just horrible situation. And so for me, it was focusing on the moment. And if I treated the moment like it had the power to catapult me forward, then I was actually present for the moment. And I wasn't just sort of, winging it through it. And so I started to do some research as to what makes moments powerful, and how do we really create these moments that can catapult ourselves forward and maybe over some of the challenges that we have. And what I found was that there's really 4 elements to momentum. There's belonging, understanding, meaning, and purpose. And if we can have those 4 things present in a moment, then it has the ability to create momentum. If it has those things and a ton of emotion attached to it, then we can absolutely use that emotional energy to catapult ourselves forward. Those are the reasons why things go viral. Every video you've ever watched, I call them ogre moments, right? They are overwhelming gut reaction of emotion. So that OGRE is the presence of a moment that has that emotional energy that has the potential to gain mass, right? That's if you go back to science class, momentum is mass times velocity, right? So how do we gather that mass? Well, you got to have emotional connection. It's the only way to gather mass quickly and abundantly. And so that emotional connection, those ogre moments, we have to be on the lookout for, to either create them ourselves or recognize them when they're in front of us, and then bump that moment forward, right? And we do that by creating that belonging, understanding, meaning, and purpose. And when we do that and share the moment, then that's where the ripple effect happens. And that's where you start to see that you can move things further, faster than maybe you thought possible. And the more of these moments that you gather, the better chance you have of doing it. I always tell people, I've lost more money in the stupid casino game where you drop a quarter in and then the quarters push other quarters down over an edge, and then those quarters push other quarters down. That's literally called the coin pusher game, right? I started to think of every moment that I can capture as like dropping a quarter in that machine. And the more that I drop, the better chance that one of these moments is going to push everything forward and create that momentum to get that reward at the end that I'm so desperate for.
Brant, can I want to put you on the spot a little bit if I can, because we have a lot of speakers and coaches and things on this podcast, and I find each kind of approach and each technique fascinating, but sometimes I have some difficulty grasping the concepts in terms of a real world example. Yeah. So I'm wondering if I can sort of, one of my issues, as I'm an actor, I don't know if you know, and I have a good career in that I've been a working actor for 25 years. I'm sort of like a guy who drives around in a van. I haven't been to the tour bus, but I got a van and I got a small record label. You know what I mean? Like, yep. I pay my bills, but it's like I've never really leapt to the next level. And one of the things that I often think about that kind of holds me back is that The term jack of all trades, master of none, it sometimes sounds like a compliment, but I kind of view it as a disparaging assessment. And I use it on myself in that the same way I'm a pretty good musician. I'm not a great musician. I'm a pretty good baseball player, but I'm not a great baseball. And I feel like there's a lack of desire for me, or not desire, but a lack of motivation for me to like put in the work necessary to really be a virtuoso guitar player rather than a guy who just strums at a campfire, And I'm curious, if I were someone that you were helping coach or something, knowing that little bit of information about me, like where would you start in terms of trying to find something, a moment that I can hone in on? Because Ryan and I talk a lot about these moments that I have sometimes where I go, that was amazing. And I want to recreate that feeling, but I don't know what the actionable steps are, in my career, in my life, that would help me not only recreate that, but create the momentum so that it keeps happening more and more. Do you have a suggestion or something like that?
Yeah, sure. First, let me say that I completely identify with what you just said. And it's hard to talk about this because you sound like a conceited asshole when you talk about stuff like this.
I'm glad you're picking up on that.
And so, the truth is when you're good at a lot of things, it's really hard to know what the thing is. Mm-hmm. Right. And that to me has been a struggle for a long time, because if I tried something, there was a good chance I was going to be fairly good at doing it. And that's just the way that I've always been, whether it was sports or music or speaking or writing books or whatever. It just has been that way. But I had a really hard time sort of knowing how to focus that energy into something that would take me to that level that would break me through. Right. And that it was just too easy to pivot, because you can pivot and do something else and still be good at it. And that's something that not everybody has. And when you're good at one thing, when you're great at one thing, that's a blessing in my eyes, because that to me tells you where you need to focus. But if you're good at a lot of things, how do you know what's the thing that's going to take you where you want to go?
I used to say, like, I was good enough to make all the sports teams, but I wasn't really good enough to get a lot of playing time.
Yeah.
And it's like, maybe if I just focused on basketball, I'd play basketball, but I didn't, so sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's totally it. Right. And so I'll tell you what somebody did for me that helped me understand. I have a really good friend. Her name is Kathleen, and Kathleen runs a consultancy. She is a sort of a growth consultant, right? So she takes franchises from a couple locations to hundreds of locations. Her name is Kathleen Wood, and Kathleen Wood Partners is this group that helps people scale whatever it is they're trying to do. And she's a dear friend, and she came to the house here with my wife and I, and sat down and spent a weekend with us. And the exercise that she did that changed everything for me, and this is the first step of what I would tell you to do, is she went to the whiteboard that we have, and she started to draw the universe of me. And so the sun's in the middle, and that's you. And then she started to ask me about all the things I was involved with. What are the things that are taking your time? And she started to draw these other planets based on what I was doing. And by the time she was done, what we started to realize was the things that I was spending the most amount of time on were the furthest away planets. They were the things that were taking my time, but were not moving me towards where I wanted to be. And so I had to disconnect myself from a lot of things first. So I had to go in and say, yes, I enjoy doing this, but I can't do it any longer until I have reached this level that I want to be. I think it sounds, Duck, to me like you're somebody who, when you reach the next rung on the ladder, your first instinct is to reach down and pull somebody else up. And I respect that. And that is how I am as well. But as my wife likes to remind me, if you reach down and try to pull somebody else up before you have sure footing, the only thing that's going to happen is they're going to pull you back down. That's it. And I lived most of my life that way, where I'd get to that next rung and I'd reach down, and I was so busy trying to lift others up that I just continued to come back down to where I was, and I couldn't break through that next thing. And so this exercise helped me detach myself from both business stuff that I was involved with, friendships and relationships that were an emotional vampire for me on other sides of things that I had to detach myself from. And so that's the sort of the first part of this, right? Which is now you got to know all your focus. And what she said to me was every successful millionaire or billionaire that I work with has one thing in common, and that is an absolute maniacal focus on one thing. That's it. For better or worse, that's what it is. And so she's like, if you're going to want to reach to that next level, everything you do has to support that goal. If it doesn't support that goal directly, you don't have to say no, but you can say not now or not yet. Right. So that was a big learn for me. So I have a lot of not yets that followed that conversation. But then the second thing that I would tell you to do, once you have that focus and you decide this is where it is, this is where this bumping a moment is what I have found. The things that work the best are dressed up common sense. If you think about the books that have made, sold millions and millions of copies, they're not winning the Nobel Peace Prize, right? They're not winning the Science Award. They're dressed up common sense because, Ryan, I'm sure you would agree that every A&R executive that ever came to your band and says, we want something original, man. We want something no one else has heard. That is the biggest bunch of bullshit that I think exists in that world. What they want is something that sounds like somebody else, but is a little bit different, right? And so what I always say is people want something that sounds familiar, but feels different. If you can accomplish those two things, man, you're going to end up catapulting yourself forward. So how do you do that? This is the easiest way to do it. When you find yourself on this path and you're going to have a moment, you're got a meeting with somebody, whatever it is, the first thing you need to do is who belongs in the moment. Is there somebody missing that needs to be invited into this moment? Is there somebody in this moment that does not belong and needs to be excused, right? That's the first thing you ask yourself. The second thing is, what are you trying to accomplish in the moment? Not the grand goal. What are you trying to accomplish in the moment? Make sure there's clarity there. The third thing is, why are you doing this? And then the final thing is, what are the next steps? This is the simplest form of bumping something forward: belonging, understanding, meaning, and purpose. This is what you just experienced in the simplest form. All of the companies that I'm working with now are using this in their meetings, right? You walk into a meeting, who belongs in this meeting? Why are, what are we trying to accomplish in this meeting? Why are we doing this? And what are the next steps? If you do that, even your everyday moments, your everyday meetings, your everyday connections are still creating momentum for you. And you do that until you either are experiencing an ogre moment where all of a sudden there's an emotional quotient to it, or you start planning what that moment's going to be and how you're going to bring emotion into it. And once that happens, then it's all about the strategic sharing of what it is that you're trying to do. So if you've got a moment, let's say you filmed a 1-minute video on something that you think is really amazing, and it's loaded with emotion and it has all of the recipe for something to be successful. You need to start thinking about how can you connect the dots on that? Where are you going to share that video? With whom are you going to share that video? I tried this out myself on social media. So I decided to try TikTok because I did not have a great presence on TikTok, right? And so I'm like, I need to figure out a way to employ this momentum concept and see if it actually works. So I decided I would take Taylor Swift, pick something that is already emotionally charged in a mostly positive way, if possible, right? And I started to do these 1-minute little videos talking about how Taylor was creating momentum for other people. And I shared it and tagged it and did all of the things all surrounding who would like these sorts of things, who would I think enjoy this sort of material. And my average views went from 400 to 400,000 And it's because I was really, really strategic about making sure I had all the moments, all of the elements, belonging, understanding, meaning, and purpose were all represented in that clip. And also I shared it with the people that I knew were going to want to hear it.
I was going to say, having Taylor Swift just in the title alone probably helps.
So you can hijack anything in the news that people are looking for all the time and use that towards your momentum, right? That news jacking that happens, it happens all the time. You know, people will tell you, oh, you need to give that 7-second hook or that 3-second hook, or you need to, you know, say this in the first 5 seconds of the video. I'm just telling you, none of that matters if nobody sees it. So start searching. I started to go to Google Trends and I started to look at what people were searching for in the moment. And that became the launching pad for me to use whatever that was to make my point about something that I was trying to create momentum for myself. And it worked every time. I tried it on Real Madrid, right? That was what was trending at the moment. Real Madrid's soccer team was trending. And so I did a video about that, again, talking about momentum, again, talking about doing these things. And, you know, 300,000 plus views, 400,000 plus views. And I just was shocked that it worked. But that's what I would tell you is the first thing you got to focus on one thing. Leave the rest of the things. It's not that you can't do them again. It's that you can't do them for now.
Well, my follow-up question to that would be, and Ryan, sorry to hijack it, but again, it's talking about me, so I'm gonna keep going. I love it. Is that when that choice is contradictory to one of my non-negotiable core values? Like you say, like, you know, reaching down and lifting someone up. Well, that's something that I never want to stop doing. You know what I mean? So if not that your program would require me to say, nope, sorry, you got to not look back and only look ahead, I would say then this isn't for me, because I'm never going to want to not help my fellow actors who don't have the same success as me. If I get some success and I can make a movie and I can put those people that I came up with in it, then I'm going to do it. That would be non-negotiable for me. So the difficulty would be if those two things are in conflict with each other.
Yeah, they're never in conflict with each other. So I'm not saying don't do that. Mm-hmm. I'm saying not yet.
Wait until I have the power to put my friends in the movie.
Would you rather lift up one, or would you rather lift up 10 or 12 or a dozen, or, you know, whatever that's going to be? That's what it is. If you are only lifting up one at a time, you're not going to have the impact, I believe, that you truly desire. Yes, it's fine. Yes, it's great. But what would it feel like if you could lift up 20 people with you at once? That's the difference, right? And that's that thing that, is difficult to do, because our nature is to want to help. And so the not yet became really useful for me when people would call me and go, can you introduce me to this speaker bureau? Can you do this or can you do that? My answer was, I would love to do that, but I need a little bit more time to cement myself in this relationship over here, so that when I make the ask, it matters. Because if I did it right now, they would do it, but you're going to get lost in the shuffle, and you don't want that, right?
It's one of the goals of this podcast, is that one of the reasons we want to have a bigger reach is because we want to get this message out to more people than just, you know, a smaller number. We want to help a larger group. So
100%. I get that totally. And so it's not no, it's just not yet. And give yourself the ability to get yourself on sure footing, so that when you lift, you can lift many and not just one.
Gotcha.
A lot of what you're talking about reminds me of some of the principles of recovery that I learned in my recovery, not just from addiction, but from other mental health challenges, but in particular in terms of the 12-step community. And these are things that aren't necessarily like in the 12 steps. They're just cultural. They've almost become sort of cliches, but for a reason. One is you can't transmit that which you don't possess, right? Which sounds like what you're talking about. It's like a lot of people, and I was one of these people early on in recovery, I just learned this stuff. I just learned these concepts, and I'm already like proselytizing and trying to be of service to other people. Sure. I haven't even reached my 1 year sober birthday, let alone, you know, work the steps start to finish, and I'm like running meetings and telling people how to work their recovery, and it's like, slow down, get yourself to where you need to be, and then you can help a whole lot of people. But you don't even have the tools yet. You're still just in the phase of needing to figure out how you're going to have 2 feet underneath you and get to tomorrow without going off the wagon, right? So it's like, if you're trying to transmit something you don't have, you're inherently sort of, it's like you're in a boat that has a hole in it, and you're just constantly having to like, get the water out that you're taking on, because you're giving of yourself of a that's not the right metaphor. you have a well that you're giving water from, and you're giving everything without getting any, filling your well first. So giving that which you don't have. That's a better metaphor. Well, the other thing that you said though is that it was similar to a recovery cliche, is just, all you need in life really is the next indicated action. You were talking about the moment, the moment. What do you need right now? What are the things that you need to, what are we trying to accomplish in this meeting, right? It may relate to something down the line. It may be, I have a longer 5-year goal that this is the first step in, but you don't need that in that moment. What you need is, what is required of me in this moment to accomplish the goal of this moment. Right. And the next indicated action, in my case, bringing it back to the recovery thing, might be, I need to get my ass to a meeting. I need to stay sober today by going to another meeting and connecting with people. Tomorrow I can think about what the next step is. But what happens when you do that, and for me, that's led me over the 8 years of my life to where I'm at now, where I'm speaking and have a podcast. I'm an author. I'm a therapist. I'm a coach. All that stuff came about because I took one step, and it was the next indicated action. And that action led me to the next indicated action. And that's all I needed that day. So what happens is, in that moment, if you're focusing on that, it reveals to you the next step. And then all you have to focus on in that moment is that next step. And if you follow that, if you continue to follow that, eventually you get not only to your goal and your 5-year plan or whatever that is, but beyond it, and places you couldn't have even fathom that you would get to if you were thinking about that and you were 10 steps ahead of yourself and not able to see what was right in front of you.
Agreed. It's the, there's a chapter in the new book about mental time travel, right? And it's sort of what our brains do is they are either stuck in the past and beating ourselves up over decisions we've already made, or we have projected ourselves to a future that doesn't exist yet, and we have anxiety over the things that haven't happened yet, and our brains are constantly traveling between time, but the only place you can have any effect on anything is now, is in the present. And so unless you're in the present, you don't have a prayer of shaping both the present moment or the future to look anything like you want it to, unless you can get there, right? And it's hard to do. I was listening to, I think, your last podcast, and you were talking about Adam's ADHD and your OCD and all those things sort of combining. But it's true, is that when you're bouncing back and forth, it's tough.
It's the filthy house corollary, in terms of, like, if you just got a filthy house where your kitchen and your bathroom and your bedroom and the laundry, and you're overwhelmed by the idea of, this is going to take me a week. So how do I'm never going to be able to do it. And you're thinking about the future of, well, if you're in the kitchen, you start the dishes. And then once the dishes are done, then you wash the floor. Then you do the laundry. You literally have to just approach what's in front of you and not worry about, this is going to take me 6 months or however long it's going to. It's just, you got to do the task at hand, and that'll lead you to the next one.
Agreed.
When you're talking about business and you're talking to people that it sounds like you're talking about in terms of your audience, how much of that is simply focusing on what your strength is, what your purpose is, and delegating to other people the things that don't require your time, your energy, your expertise? That's a place that I'm in right now. Duck and I have been having conversations about this, because you do get overextended when you have a bigger goal and there's a lot of things to do. And I'm having to, at this moment, it's like, what is actually necessary for me to be doing it and for me to be using my time to do it? Because I kind of want to do it all myself, because I'm a control freak, And I have a feeling that sooner or later, if you're in any sort of industry where you're trying to get ahead, you're probably somebody who has that personality that wants to be a go-getter and do everything, but you can't do it all at once, and you can't do it all yourself. So is that a factor in what
it is? And so part of that, I think it's twofold, right? So part of it is getting back to those non-negotiable values and defining what you mean by what you say. So for me, impact is one of my non-negotiables, but impact on one person is nice, but that's not good enough for me. I want more. I want a bigger impact. And so that starts because I've defined that, and I know that it's not just one or two or a few, but it's many. That helps me focus on what I need to be putting my time into. Now, the other part of that, and Ryan, I know that we've sort of connected through our friends at Two Market Media. And so as I was working with them, even on this new book concept, our friend Hank over there and I would get into these shouting matches at each other because he would ask me a question and I would go to answer it and trying to give a little bit of context, and he would just yell at me, verbs first, right? And there were some wonderful conversations, I got to tell you. Like it made me focus. And so what I'm going to tell you is when you know your non-negotiables on that side and the things that you have defined as to what you need for your life, that's part A. But part B is verbs first, right? And so you've got to be telling people what to do in those areas that will help you reach that goal that you've set for yourself. You don't have to do everything. That doesn't mean that you can't oversee everything, but you don't have to be in the minutia of every day. So verbs first to get people to do what you expect them to do, but also know over here that definition of what you have set out for success and the goal and the value and everything else. Because if you don't, and this is the trouble that we have all the time, and this is what we end up working with leaders on very frequently, is if you don't separate really important from non-negotiable and you treat them the same, you will not have the time to do so. The time management factor it will never equal that, because out of the, God, I don't know, tens of thousands of people now have taken this assessment. The average person selects 30 different values that they say are really important to them in their life. And we force them to take that 30 and bring it down to 5. Well, if you never do that work, then your brain's constantly trying to satisfy 30 different things that you've said are really important to you. And you know that that's an impossible task on a daily basis. And so when you do that work to get things down to a manageable amount, somewhere between 4 and 6, I think is the number from what we have discovered. Those values need attention every day. We call it feeding your sheep, right? You got to feed your sheep every day. I always have to tell people that, I've got all these pictures of sheep on my wall, and people just, if I don't give the clarity,
people might
seems
be a little
weird,
questionable.
We're actually going to be moving soon, and so when the house is for sale and stuff, people are walking through. I feel like I got to leave a note, like I'm not weird. I wrote a book called Black Sheep. I promise people just send me pictures of sheep. But
I got pictures of ducks all over my house too,
Yes,
but it's a little easier to
sense.
understand.
But I think that's it, man. You've got to make sure that you get to those 5, that you have defined what they mean, and that you put in the time to feed them every day. They don't all get the same amount. Some might get a 7-course meal, some might get table scraps, but they all get something. And the reason is because you want them to be there when you need them. And the longer they go without attention, the further away they stray. And next thing you know, you're in a crisis and you don't have those values.
I would add the caveat that verbs first is good, but on a podcast, it's okay to have some adjectives and flowery language, because we really gotta make it, we gotta make it entertaining. So
yes, but in the title on YouTube, verbs first, I imagine, is probably a good motto.
Because I'd click that and going, what does that mean? I want to know what that means.
he haunts me in my dreams of yelling at me to say verbs first. But I've learned that when you do it, it is effective. So I'm working on it.
So does that apply? That's when you're speaking on stage. That's when verbs first is.
Yeah. Listen, if I'm being hired as an expert on anything, I better be given verbs first to tell people what to do, because that's what they expect. Right. It's a different scenario. If you are addressing the many, I believe verbs first is the most effective way of communicating. But if we are in a more intimate setting, then I have an opportunity to get to know you better and to get some context. And I want to know those things, so I know if what I'm going to suggest or any advice I would potentially give is actually going to be useful for you. But when I'm being hired for a specific reason to help our people achieve their big goals or help our people form a stronger, unbreakable culture, I know what they're asking for. And so I'm going to give them verbs first so that they feel like they can walk away with some tangible, actions to follow.
Action statements. Yeah.
Brant, do you, as a guy who obviously practices what he preaches, when you get up on stage and you have, like you say, you're not just a presenter, you don't just have a slideshow that you go to and you're on your feet. Are there moments where, and this is sort of a two-pronged question, are there moments where sometimes you don't know what to say and you are stumped by maybe a question or something? And also, are there moments where you still struggle with maybe a new concept that you're trying to work out the verbiage for, or just in general, like you're a confident guy, you've been a rock star, but are there still moments where you go, I feel unsure about this, or I'm having some anxiety, or I'm having some doubt? What does that look like for you, and how do you deal with it?
All the time on both fronts, right? So it's on one side, when you get up there and you start sort of, it depends on how much audience interaction you are setting yourself up for, right? And so presenters don't have to worry about it because they don't ask the audience shit. They just sit there and present information. But if you are going to engage an audience and allow them to participate, which I would argue is the more, at least, entertaining approach to keeping people paying attention to you for an hour, I do this thing a lot where I talk about our favorites. And I use our favorites as a way to guess what people actually truly care about. And so I have them tell me their favorite movie.
Oh, I thought you meant like in your internet browser, your favorites.
No, not those favorites. I don't know if
you want to mention those.
No, nobody wants to see what you've got in your browser history.
Are there sheep videos too, Brant? Do we have to talk about the sheep videos? Okay, sorry.
No, this is like favorite songs, favorite movies, favorite food, favorite smells. There's a reason we have favorites, right? And it's when our head and our heart connects. When our head and our heart connects, it engages your limbic brain. Your limbic brain's where all of your emotional long-term memory is stored. It's why you remember the lyrics to your favorite song. It's why you remember quotes to your favorite movie. All of those things are the reasons why. It also serves as breadcrumbs back to the things that matter most to you. And so these really powerful values all have experiences attached to them. It's why you form the value in the first place. And so the idea when I go into the audience and I say, what's your favorite movie that you give me one of your top 5 favorite movies you've ever seen, and someone says Showgirls, I've sort of opened myself up for a bit of a conversation.
Right.
And then I ask them to describe it, and you just never know what they're going to say. Right. So on Monday, I did 3 different talks on Monday and asked this question to each group. And, I got different answers for each. I got Shawshank Redemption. I got Happy Gilmore. I got Elf. It's like when people say these things and then you ask them to describe, give me a 30-second summary of the movie. Whatever they say in that 30 seconds, I promise you I can tell you what matters most to them. Because when we talk about our favorites, we're really specific with the language that we use. And so they're giving me themes of the values that matter to them. So if they're talking about perseverance, or they're talking about hope, or they're talking about connection, or they're talking about integrity or authenticity, like those things come out in the words that they choose to describe their favorite things. And so, yeah, the more that I open myself up for those things, the more precarious the moment can be. But then there are just moments where somebody says something that rocks me, and to me, in those scenarios, I think some people would try to make a joke, or they would, pivot and do the political thing where you don't answer the question that's being asked. I'm very open and upfront, like, wow, that's an amazing question. And would you afford me a chance to go back and do a little bit of research? Because I'd love to give you something that matters, but that's an amazing question. And so, and oftentimes I'll make sure that they get a card or they come after and we exchange information, whatever that is. But yeah, it still happens all the time. But listen, people want it. It's a hard thing. It's a balancing act. And Ryan, I would imagine you have experienced a bit of this as well. If you're coming in as a rock star in whatever industry you're in, there's a level of expectation that you're going to be a rock star. And there's certain things attached to that, both good and bad. I think the rope that people give you coming in as a rock star is much longer than an accountant coming in to talk to you about whatever it is that you're asking them to tell you. You can be a little irreverent without repercussion. Other people can't get away with that. So it is a bit of a tightrope at times, right? Of how irreverent can I be on brand without offending somebody, especially in the corporate space, which you can't afford. I don't talk about my political leanings or this or that because I can't afford people to make a decision on me one way or another. I have to be neutral. And so that's both hard for me if I'm trying to be authentic and live my values.
That was going to be my question. Is that a non-negotiable? We don't really talk politically on this podcast either, but if someone were to ask me about what I think is going on right now, I wouldn't be ashamed to. It'd be like, I think it's appalling. And I think, you know what I mean? Like, that's got to be a struggle of having to hide you, kind of just nodding. And
so this is what I would say. What I've had to learn to do is what you just said. If someone asks me, if I am in a one-on-one conversation with somebody, I have zero problem talking to them about how I feel about what's going on and all of those things. But I'm not going to volunteer opinions that nobody asked for. And that's just for the sake of my well-being. I don't want to alienate. And the truth is, in my heart of hearts, I believe that we truly care about a lot of the same things. I mean, I can basically prove that with all of the data that we have on the values of what people truly care about. I just think the approach of how we get there is drastically different. And that's the challenge. But if we could at least agree that we care about the same things, then there's a lot of flexibility, I think, in the how. But if we never get to the what we agree on, does it really matter? Because no one's paying attention.
So Brant, what are your 5 non-negotiable values?
I'm not comfortable sharing those with you guys at this point after today. So I'll tell you this. So mine are, I have 6, right? You can't be in the music world for that long.
Wait a second.
Wait a minute.
Look, we do everything to excess. I'm sorry. I needed one more, right?
This one goes to 11.
It's true, right? So mine are creativity, hope, impact, empathy, family, and authenticity, right? Those are my 6. Every decision I make in my life gets filtered through those 6 things, and they either honor them or they don't. And it's really simple to make decisions if that's how you're using it, right? And that's exactly what I've done for the last 4 years. And things are going pretty good.
Can values always be brought down to one word like that? Because I feel like if I were to try to think of what my 5 non-negotiable values are, I would have to explain each of them, at least in my head, for a while. Maybe there's some brainstorming I need to do before I can answer that question. Verbs first.
Yes.
Well, those were nouns that you listed, right?
Yeah. So it's true. Yes. I have to verbify them to get them to make sense.
Integrity.
So a couple of things that are important, I think, for you to know when it comes to values. Our values exist in a hierarchy, and there are from what we have sort of done, there are 5 different families of values. And so if we, in our assessment, and I'll share a link with you guys, anybody that's listening can take it for free, right? We offer it on the website. You get an immediate report of what your 5 non-negotiable values are. Happy to do that. And we'll make sure it's in the show notes.
Ooh, I want to do that now.
So what's interesting is that the 5 families of values pretty much encompass 80 to 100 different values, right? Because things like family, faith, relationships, community, all of that would fall under the highest value in that family, which would be connection. So connection is the highest in the hierarchy of that family of values. And what I just gave you were 5 different ways you experience that connection. So a lot of times when we do work with people, I'll get something like faith as one of their 5. And my first question to them is, I don't know what you mean by that. And I don't know that you do either. I think it sounds good. And I think you know what it means. But if I asked you to define it, I think you might struggle. And so what is it about faith that makes you say it's one of your non-negotiable values? And as they talk more and more and more, they find out that, is it faith? Is it connection? Is that really what it's about? Connecting to that higher being, that belief, that whatever it is that however you're going to define it. So oftentimes, when people take this, the next thing they do is you can also download a free a values tracking workbook. It's a 2-week workbook that at the end of each night, you sort of go through and you track your values. Did they show up today? How many times did they show up today? And this helps you sort of pull apart the truth from make-believe. And sometimes it's not that you are lying to yourself. It's that you've been conditioned to care for other people's sheep. Right. So if I grew up caring for siblings or an elderly grandparent, or I was in a one parent household, whatever that looked like, oftentimes we're conditioned to care about what they care about. And we do it for so many years that these values mask themselves as our own, and they're actually not. And it takes some work. And the truth of the matter is, when you track them, the stuff that matters most to you will show up organically. It really will.
It's an interesting, your example of how our values are more aligned than a lot of people think they are. Faith, in the definition of faith, is not a value of mine. I wasn't raised religious. I'm relatively atheistic, but community is super high. I long for community. Ryan and I we talked about it in the intro today, how I want my house to be the house where all my kids' friends come. I want that community. So I could see how I could have that connection with someone who might connect community to their church, where I would say that's not important to me, but the concept of, getting together with people and providing and helping and lifting up a community we'd be right in line with each other. So
agreed. Wouldn't it be amazing? And this is the thing that I have wished the most for. And maybe when this new podcast comes out and I have a chance to leverage that platform, God, I would love to have some of these politicians on my show just to ask them what their 5 non-negotiable values are, because they're so busy telling us what everybody else cares about. Mm-hmm. And that's the, I say this, I've spoken several times for the Professional Photographers of America group, right? And there's like tens of thousands of members to this group. And I've spoken at their national conference. And one of the years that I spoke, what I said to them was, they did not take this very well. What I said to them was, if you can't tell me what your 5 non-negotiable values are, you've never taken an original photograph in your entire life. You've only given me a reflection of what matters to everybody else. And what I try to get them to understand is that when you know what your 5 things are, I should see those things represented in one way or another in your photographs. I should be able to guess what those are based on how you frame a shot, what the subject matter is, all that sort of stuff. It's your calling card. It's what separates you from the 10,000 people sitting next to you, are the things that matter to you.
Or in your music, or in my acting choices, or in the way you practice therapy. I mean, all
I
those things
literally,
have to be
Duck,
reflected.
just had this conversation. Sarah Middich was, I was on her podcast. Sarah's on Star Trek Discovery, incredible actress. And what we talked about in the audition process is these are the things she needs to bring to the table, because it's those values that are going to give that unique spin on whatever the read is that will separate her from everybody else that's coming doing the same thing. But if you don't know what they are, you're winging it. And Duck, you might like this. Do you know where the term winging it comes from?
I don't.
In the early 1900s, there is a boom happening in the States, and there are people have more money and time than they know what to do with, right? Let's please go back a couple hundred years. So what happens is they decide they're going to build a bunch of playhouses to give people something to do with their time and money. And so they build all these playhouses, especially out in California. They build all these playhouses, and they build so many playhouses that they now have more playhouses than they have available actors. And so what ends up happening is somebody gets hurt, somebody gets sick, and at the last minute, somebody has to fill in for this role. And so they go to the theater, they step off of the stage into the wings of the theater, and they frantically try to memorize the lines they have to say just before they step on stage. That practice became known as winging it, right? So something that was designed as a way to treat an emergency situation, we've adopted as a way of life. We just live our lives this way. We wing it, and we frantically try to figure out what the hell we're doing just before it happens, instead of figuring out what we truly care about, learning our lines, if you will, so that we can focus on the performance and not on the content.
Well, it sounds awesome to me. I'd love to do that. That's an exciting acting challenge.
Well, as an improvisational actor,
Exactly.
winging it is a way of life for you.
Yeah.
All right, fine. If you're an improv actor, you can wing it, but that's the only circumstance of which it would be acceptable.
Understood. Okay.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And when I was sitting here thinking about how I would answer that question about the non-negotiable, it's interesting that connection was something that came up in your discussion of it, because that was that's a core value of mine. Is I've lived a life without connection, and the void of that was what made the worst time in my life the worst. And so connection, that can mean a lot of different things, and it can take a lot of different forms. But I think that's essentially what we all are seeking to some degree, because it's just a human need that we all have some form of connection in our lives.
It's the number one shared value among all people by a 50% margin to the next closest shared value. That's how important connection is.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And I loved that when you were describing belonging, understanding, meaning, and purpose, the verb that you used was create. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I realized, and it's sort of an existential way of seeing meaning and purpose in life. I realized I was sitting around waiting for, God or the universe to bestow meaning and purpose on my life, until I realized those are things I can create for myself. Those are things that I can wake up tomorrow and decide, this is what matters to me. So I'm going to do what I need to do to make that meaningful and purposeful in my life. And it's I had to go to some pretty low lows to come to that realization. And I don't think that people have to. What you're talking about is sharing with people something that you might go through your whole life and not recognize because you never had to recognize it.
Yeah.
But when you do, if you have the recognition that creating meaning and purpose in your life can be the difference between a fulfilling life and an unfulfilling life. And it can be the difference between achieving your goals and not achieving your goals. That even if you've never really sunk into the lows where you're suffering on a level where you're in deep pain and agony, you might be in a state where you're just going to go through the rest of your life accepting a life that doesn't fulfill you. Mm-hmm. And yet, yeah. So
Gallup's, some of the latest research that they've come out with in the corporate world, that are, I think, relevant to what you just said. 31% of employees believe right now that the work they do has no meaning at all. And 75% of employees believe their organization they work for does not care about them. So when we think about meaning and purpose and belonging and all those sorts of things, this is, sort of the bed that we have made that now we have to lay in. And it is something that is a challenge that extends far beyond the corporate world. I think it's into our personal lives as well. And it's something that if we start thinking about these things, when you define what matters most to you, you know what gives you meaning. So that's sort of the pre-production, if you will. If you do that work, then you're going to be at least in a position to find meaning in the work that you do. Purpose is something we choose. I say it all the time. In fact, your purpose statement for your life that I would highly recommend you write should have your non-negotiable values in it. If there is not an alignment between your what and your why, then the how will never happen. And that's the real challenge. So for me, creativity, hope, impact, empathy, family, authenticity. My purpose statement is to creatively impact others by authentically providing hope. It's integrated. The meaning is built into the purpose because my values are in my purpose statement. And so when somebody says, what's your purpose? The reason I do what I do is that statement. It's not money. It's not fame. It's not success. It's not anything else. It's literally, that's what gets me out of bed every day. I want to creatively impact others to authentically provide hope. That's it. At the end of the day, hope is everything for me because I've had it taken from me and I know what that does. And so, when the more that you do this work, and it's hard work, and it's something that you can't just take an assessment and go, I figured it out. It's not taking that Facebook quiz that tells you what Kardashian you are. It is doing a little bit of hard work to figure out what really truly are your non-negotiables, because I can't tell you how easy it is to say no to something when you know it violates one of your non-negotiables, and you don't feel bad about it. There's no regrets. There's nothing, because it's just your brain goes, no, this is a non-negotiable. It's no, there's no discussion. That to me has been so freeing to be able to do that and not have, because empathy is one of mine as well. I'm empathetic with every situation. It's helped my empathy, because if I can convince myself logically that it just violates one of my non-negotiables, then my empathy is okay. But if I don't do that, and I'm always wondering, and I have an idea of what it is, but I'm not quite sure if I can put my actual finger on it, then you end up in a tornado of emotion that you're hoping to find the right thing at the right time.
Well, it sounds like you having that North Star of following that mission statement and not allowing yourself to be, I really want to make a lot of money, or I really want to, that's the stuff that stuff will come as long as you stay true to that mission. And it sounds to me, if you'll permit me, it sounds like you honor Theo's legacy a lot by doing that and staying, if that's a reminder for the reason why you do that, to make other people have those moments that you had come by very hard earned. I'll say it less eloquently than that, but I think it's very noble, and I thank you for the effort that you put forth to kind of make everyone else's life better for that same purpose.
I appreciate that, bud. I really do. It means a lot, because at this point in my life, that legacy factor is everything for me. So that means everything to me. Thank you.
Kudos.
Well, Brant, you've been very generous with your time, and this has been a really interesting conversation, and it's given me a lot to think about. So thank you for sharing, the stuff that people usually have to pay a lot of money to hear you motivate.
Well, I will do this. I'm going to make this offer to both of you. If you do the work, if you take the assessment, let's get on a call and let me poke and prod a little bit to see what's real and what's not.
Hell yeah.
Okay.
I'm down. I need it. I need that kick in the ass. So
I would love it. Listen, I've gotten quite good at hip checking people into the board, so let's do it.
Please do. All right. Deal.
I love it. All right. Well, thank you so much, Brant. This has been great. This has been another episode of the Harder to Breathe podcast. If you have any comments or questions for me and Duck, please reach out to us at hardertobreathepodcast@gmail.com. We drop new episodes every Tuesday. Download, like, and subscribe. Do all the things. Leave comments, leave reviews. It all helps. We're trying to make an impact here. We love that you're listening. Thank you so much.
On this episode, only leave verbs in the comment section. Just verbs. I just want to see if I can parse what you're trying to get to.
Great note to end on.
Exactly.
Thank you once again, Brant Menswar, for being our guest on today's episode. We'll see you next time on the Harder to Breathe podcast. Take care.